Okay.
We got it. Take it away, sir.
How y'all doing today? Sorry about the confusion we had a couple of weeks ago. That was on me, and I felt really bad about that. So hopefully I can make up for it today. My name is Jeff Adams. I've taught this class for Spear before, but since we previously have done it, some changes to the code have occurred and so forth. It's a rather long, and so we're going to breeze through it pretty quickly, and then I can answer questions at the end. I teach the same class in other areas for 4 hours of CEUs, so we're going to have to go through it pretty quickly. Um, the Most of the stuff with stucco, it has been around forever and ever and ever. The ASTM standards go back to the old um, cabo and stuff like that was actually in effect before the IRC and the IBC come around. So most of the stuff has stayed the same. One of the big differences, though, now is the need for a range screen or furring strips in the code, trying to allow air movement back behind these products, as well as creating drainage channels, trying to stop some of the leak issues. So I see the changes to the code is not only helping with the stucco installation and controlling water, but it's also going to do a lot for thermal bridging, where the stucco heats up and transfers the heat into the building envelope through thermal bridging. With these plastic materials and airflow and stuff, we're going to greatly reduce the surface contact of the wall framing and help break some of the thermal bridging. How much of a difference it makes, I'm not sure. And it's going to be a great product, I think, even to use behind products like fiber cement siding and so forth. So in here, I base this off of residential construction, but the ideology for a rain screen or furring strips has been around in the IBC for a couple of revisions now. So it's just now transferred over to the International Residential Code. And depending on where you're at, you probably haven't even seen it being used. It's supposed to be, but somehow it's been slipping through the cracks in most cities. So in here, we're going to just basically address the IRC 703.7 for the exterior plaster installation. In that section, it does dictate that the ASTM C926 and ASTM C1063 provisions are required to be adopted and followed as well. And that's going to really get you off way into the weeds of what needs to be done with stucco, because the IRC does not address enough with stucco. I don't know how many people have a copy of those ASTM standards. If you don't, you definitely want to invest into them, because that's really the Bible for plaster, adhered stone, different things like that. And you really need to have those in order to be able to look to see what is required of stucco. We're going to kind of skip through here and so forth, but there's four main stuccos that you typically see, and it gets way off more than that, but you'll get the idea here. You have your hard coat stucco, your eaves, your modified stuccos, which there's a lot of different variations where they're using almost like a combination between an eaves, putting a styrofoam board underneath it, adding a single coat of plaster. But when you read that, there's certain products on the market that dictate that you can use a single coat of stucco or the plaster, but when you read the ASTM, none of those really comply with ASTM standards. So there is some issues with a lot of those modified stuccos that are being used out there that don't have proper documentation with the ASTM. And then your manufactured stone veneer, what I like to call the lick and stick, which is still a stucco process. And then there's also this other stuff that LP had out. It just keeps coming back around. It's sold as stucco, but it's they were using it over their armor strand. They've since quit making armor strand, and they put it over their siding, and it's just a single polymer top coat from Stowe, or drive it over the top of it to look like stucco, but it's wood siding, creates all kinds of issues. Moisture gets into it, leaks, and it does deteriorate. That's a whole chapter in itself to be able to cover, and we won't really cover that today. So that's the end of the presentation. All stucco is bad and a liability, and there's a lot of truth in that. It's a great product when it's applied properly. It's been around forever and ever and ever, and you always hear that, and it has been, but it was applied over adobe, it was applied over cinder blocks and so forth, or even a clay structural block, and so it worked very well in those applications. And now we're trying to put it over a wood substrate and sealing these walls off. They're not breathing and so forth, and so we're having all kinds of issues with the way we are actually doing it. I had the option to go into one of Geronimo's last strongholds over in the Chiricahua Mountains a few years ago and took some video recording and stuff. And they took some rock and earth and God knows what else, and they kind of plastered the rock together, kind of a modified masonry with the natural stones, but then also the dirt and everything, and made a plaster that's been there since the 1800s, the late 1800s, and it's still there and working just fine. But it's not over that wood substrate. When we start talking insulation and your wood sheathing and so forth, it's just creates a whole lot of issues with the stucco. The stucco itself is not bad, but the way we install it is where the problem lies. What to look for, obviously a drainage system. Everything has to drain. We've got a lot of issues with that. The flashings at doors and windows, those are always, no matter what our siding materials are, those are always our weak points, any type of penetration. Got to control expanding and contracting, although that's the limited aspects of it. People always freak out that the stucco or the plaster's cracked, but a thin layer of concrete like that is always going to crack. One of the big issues you really see is a lack of bond breaks, what I refer to as bond breaks, but you've got to have a plaster stop, casing bead, people call it J-channels, what have you. You cannot just butter plaster up to a vinyl window, fiberglass window, aluminum window, a wood window, anything else. It does need to have a 1/4 inch space, a minimum. It does need to have a backer rod, depending on type of sealant, and then properly sealed to allow those dissimilar materials to work. You start buttering them up to the aluminum windows, it occasionally will just eat away at those windows. You're going to see here in the code that aluminum head flashings are not allowed to be used, but yet we're buttering plaster cementitious products straight to the aluminum windows, and it does create an issue from time to time. Why it does it in one area, not the other, I don't know, but you will down the road see windows completely eaten out from the cement. Elastomeric paints have a real problem with those. They tend to trap moisture. The perm ratings are not as great, and you have to have a perfect product in order for it to work. Otherwise, the water gets behind it, traps the water. You go to houses and you'll see the air bubbles and so forth in, or not air bubbles, but water bubbles behind the paint, and it traps that moisture in there. And I find that a lot of times these elastomeric paints tend to be, it looks like it's causing a lot more rot than anything else. And of course, these the builders and so forth are using these products rather than using proper installation of materials. So it's just not a substitute. And I think the paints may work all right if they're just perfectly done, but when they're not, they just trap water. And you cut open a house that has elastomeric paint, and you tend to find way more rot and decay on those types of deals. I prefer some of the polymer top coats myself, just anything that has a better perm rating. You know, we allow a certain amount of water vapor into the house, and then we basically size our air conditioners to help control that humidity and moisture as well. Why certain products like Tyvek and whatever have their perm ratings in there and allow that. Here's just some of the standards. I always tell people, just when you see this, just print this as it's a great little cheat sheet. These numbers often will change a little bit, so you do have to watch that. We'll kind of go through these, but the IRC 703.4.2, previously known as 703.8, covered flashings. And when you read that, it's a little confusing because it starts off with chimneys, and so people often overlook that section. Don't overlook that section because it does get into your stucco and your plasters and so forth. So don't overlook that section because it starts with chimneys. 703.7 is your exterior plaster. 703.7.1 lath and furring. 703.7.1.1 is your furring, which has been addressed previously um, in the IRC, but it now covers a little bit more in depth, as you'll see here in a little bit. 703.7.2 is your plaster. 703.7.2.1 is a weep screed. On down the line, your water resistant barriers. This is where we start getting into some changes here. 703.7.3.2, and that's your moist climates, which is a lot of the state of Texas falls under that category. 703.7.4 application. This is a huge failure. 703.7.5 is curing. I'm sure it's happened somewhere, but I have never witnessed in 30 years any type of moist curing. And if it does happen, it only happens one time and never again. Then we get into the ASTM C926 standards, the ASTM C1063, which is listed in the specifically in section 703.7 of the code that these must be followed. And as you can see, it gives you the application of Portland cement-based plaster, and then 1063 really gets off deep into your lathing, the furring, and so forth. And then I've also added this in here, and I probably should add one more next time I make a revision, but that's ASTM E2112, which covers your flashings of doors, windows, and so forth. That's a huge failure. The other one that really should go in here is your AAMA standards for windows, because again, that's where so much of our failure is. It is occurring. So it's something that really needs to be in here and really needs to be looked at for this. Here, we'll start kind of touching on these. The 703.4.2 approved corrosion resistant flashing shall be applied in shingle fashion in a manner to prevent entry of water into the wall cavity or penetration. Goes into a little more detail there, but the number two of that is at intersections of chimneys or other masonry construction with frame or stucco walls with projecting lips on both sides under stucco copings. A lot of your stucco has those projecting lips. Some of them based on the window type. You have projecting lips on almost all stucco. Very seldom do you see it just completely smooth, butted up to different windows, doors, what have you. There's always projection. So when you really look at that, that even really covers your fiber cement siding. And I brought that up to James Hardy, and they just kind of went, we'll get back to you. They were kind of stumped by that. But when you look at that, the Hardy doesn't really have copings, but it has uneven projections. And so most of everything we have does require a flashing. And your peeling sticks, as you're going to see, do not comply for stucco whatsoever. And we're going to cover that here in just a second. Your 703.7, your stucco installation of exterior plaster shall be in compliance again with that ASTM C926, ASTM C1063, and the provisions of this code. These are cut right out of the code. You can't be any more straightforward than that. It is telling you, you must comply with that. And that is a huge breakdown across the state of Texas, as well as other places. I've been to other states as well. They've flown me to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, to look at stucco and plaster over there a mile off from the Atlantic Ocean, and they had their share of issues there as well. 703.7.1.1 furring were provided. Furring shall consist of wood furring strips not less than 1 inch by 2 inches, minimum 3/4 inch, metal channels, and self furring lath, and shall be installed in accordance with ASTM 1063. Furring shall be spaced not greater than 24 inches on center, and where installed over wood or cold form steel framing shall be fastened into framing members. Okay, so again, that's pretty specific. It's giving us our furring and so forth. Your self-furring lath, that is kind of like the old deal where they used to say self-flashing windows. Doesn't necessarily really exist. There's usually other products attached to it that gives us that furring, such as a rain screen, and we're going to cover that here in a minute. I don't know of a self-furring lath out there anywhere, and if it is, it's not in most of the markets around here, that's for sure. I'm not going to say that somewhere in the world it does not exist, but it's not something you're typically going to see. It's usually going to have another product attached to it, such as a rain screen or what have you, in order to get that. Otherwise, they do make metal furring that can be used to create that air space and drainage channel. 703.3.2 moist areas, which obviously covers the San Antonio area, but covers a lot of our marine areas. So a big part of Texas falls into that. Probably, if I had to guess, a good half of the state would probably fall into those types of categories. In addition to complying with Section 703.7.3.1, a space or drainage material not less than 3/16 of an inch, 5 millimeters in depth, shall be added to the exterior side of the water resistant barrier. In addition to complying with Section 703.7.3.1, Item 2, drainage on the exterior of the water resistant barrier shall have a drainage efficiency of not less than 90% as measured in accordance with ASTM E2273. You get the idea. So it kind of specific. I think it could be written a little bit better, so it's not makes it a little simpler. The old adage, keep it simple, stupid, really applies. But most of the areas that you're going to see are, unless you're out in the deserts of West Texas or so, or possibly up in the Panhandle, is going to require some of these products. Great way to control the moisture, allow airflow, dry by evaporation. But the other thing I really think we're going to see as a byproduct of that, like I said, is a way better energy efficiency. We're going to break a lot of that thermal bridging that occurs, and as that southwestern side really heats up and transfers that heat inside the house. I think you're going to see a major difference in that thermal bridging. The 703.7 is lath. Chicken wire generally won't comply with the standards. There are some that do. I've seen huge failures with chicken wire because they go out and buy a cheapest chicken wire you can, and it cannot resist the weight of the stucco and just starts collapsing off the walls. I think I might still have some pictures in this presentation of that. 703.7 exterior plaster installation materials shall comply again with the ASTM. 703.7, the lath, all lath attachments shall be of corrosion resistant materials. Expanded metal or woven wire laths shall be attached 1.5 inch long, 11 gauge nails. It gives you all the details of how to do that, or 16 gauge staple spaced no more than 6 inches or is otherwise approved. They use staples everywhere. It is not secured at 6 inches. Not even close. They're going to typically stay around 2 feet out on those staples. There's some real issues with that, because the other thing that happens when you use your fasteners, and it doesn't really address this, but one of the failures you see is they will shoot those fasteners. They will shoot them down at an angle, and in doing so, that water travels and follows that. The other thing happens with the staples, we're just adding that many more holes into our WRB. And granted, we're not creating a submarine, but as you're going to see from some of my photos here, the huge amounts of disasters. And there's a few things with that. Like when I write stucco specifications, I specify that the staples have to be no less than horizontal into the wall, and preferably at a slight angle upwards, to help prevent the water from following those fasteners into the wall assembly as much as they typically do. 703.7.2 plaster. Plaster shall be not less than 3 coats were applied over metal lath or wire lath, and shall be not less than 2 coats were applied over masonry, concrete, pressure preservative treated wood, or decay resistant wood as specified in R 317.1, or gypsum backing board. They still use some gypsum, not a big fan of it. It doesn't have the same pullout strength, and so forth. It tends to get really beat up and boogered up. It does have a waxy coating, and it can work, but these guys are monsters on a job site, and they don't take the care to protect it. And I'd rather see something a little more durable, but it is still allowed. There's still a few builders out there that are still using panel ray or some of the other products that are out there, and they do work, but you have to really watch how they use those. Make sure if they're a tongue and groove type of gyp board being used as WRB, that tongue and groove is installed properly. Sometimes they install it upside down, and it will not prevent the water from entering the wall very well when you do that. There is, like I said, a product out there that's it's called Western One Coat, and it's a one coat gypsum. And the problem with those is, again, they don't really completely comply with the ASTM standards. They do have it approved through their ICC evaluation. But you're putting on large amounts of plaster. They tend to crack a little bit more. So I'd rather keep it to the 3 coat when possible, help alleviate some of the cracking. And then the other thing is trying to get it uniformly thick enough. There's some groups going around cutting open all these houses and showing how the plaster's too thin, and any given house that does not have or structure that does not have 3 coats is typically going to be a little, somewhere you'll find it where it's less than 5/8 of an inch thick. So that does happen. 703.7.2, the weep screed. This is probably one of the single biggest screw ups anywhere, and one of the most important aspects. The window head flashings, obviously the peel and stick flashings around windows and doors per the AMA and ASTM E2112. It's all about the flashings. The trim, what I call the stucco trim accessories, are not as big of a deal, but the flashings are. Sorry about that. Stupid emails coming through. The flashings is where it's all at. We got to control the water and get it kicked back out of the wall. And so depending on where you're at, it's very specific on this. When you get down to the coastal areas, there is some changes that has to occur. Otherwise, the wind-driven rain will be forced up underneath the plaster and create an issue. But it's very specific. 26 galvanized sheet gauge, corrosion resistant weep screed or plastic weep screed with minimum vertical attachment flange of 3.5 inches. Shall be provided. So your plaster stops, casing beads, all those other types of deals do not work. One of the biggest failures, and you'll see it in my photos here in a little bit, is the fact that those things come pre-punched with holes, and they will raise that weep screed up, shoot it with a staple gun, put all the fasteners in too low, and now it only overhangs the foundation by 3/4 of an inch to an inch. When you use a foundation weep screed, it's going to overhang no less than 2 inches, and if you buy the one that's designed for coastal areas, it's going to give you typically about a 4-inch overhang, give or take, over the foundation. It does have to have clearance to all your hardscapes, sidewalks, porches, any of that type of stuff of 2 inches and so forth. And that's usually a big failure. Down here, if you get at least 1 inch, it tends to work all right. As you guys get up there closer to Dallas, the Panhandle, places like that, especially at your roof lines, if they don't put in a proper drainage plan, it's going to ice dam. I've got a lot of pictures of ice damming that I need to add into this presentation, even down here in the San Antonio area. But the ice damming is a big issue the further north you go with it and so forth. The 703.7.3 water resistant barriers. This is a huge one, because no matter what we put on a structure, and I just did a 3-day training deal that's going to come out. It's not going to be a full 3 days. We spent 3 days filming on site. it's all about the WRBs. The stucco or the plaster is water resistant. It's not waterproof. It is really there is to be water resistant, to be a decorative detail to the exterior of the house, and then to protect these WRBs from impact and from UV damage, because all these products have an issue with overexposure to UV, especially on your bigger houses. It creates a massive problem. If you're talking about Tyvek itself, it has 120 days. Zip has a 6 month, but your felt papers, most of those are 30 days. So once they put up that tile out, they have to start moving on that because it just deteriorates in the UV light. So the water resistant barriers are the biggest aspect with the flashings. Got to make sure they're free of holes, make sure they're all installed properly. And that's a huge failure. And hopefully more cities will start getting involved in doing WRB inspections. A lot of cities are not doing them, but it's very important no matter what material, whether we're talking about brick, stone, fiber cement, an LP product, wood, cedar, lap. I mean, it just doesn't matter. It's all about these WRBs and these flashing details at the windows that is what's going to protect these houses. It gives you a little bit of detail about that. I think most everyone that's taken this course here today understands about WRB and the importance, so we won't get into it any more than that. 703.7.4 application. Each coat shall be kept in a moist condition for at least 48 hours prior to application of the next coat. Nobody is going out there and doing that. As we start getting into these hotter time periods, it becomes a big issue. Quite often, I've seen guys put on one coat, going around the house, and by the time they come back around the other side the next day, they're reapplying stucco and so forth. It's not being kept moist cured. It does need to be hosed down and misted a couple of times a day to moist cure it, and it is not happening. It's a huge failure point, causing a lot of excessive cracking and damage to the first couple of coats to the plaster on there. 703.7.5. I'm sorry. More in the curing. The finish coat or 2-coat cement plaster shall not be applied sooner than 7 days after application of the first coat. For 3-coat cement plaster, the second coat shall not be applied sooner than 48 hours after that. So that first coat is taken roughly a week of curing time, and that is not hardly ever happening. If you're lucky, they apply it on a Friday and they don't come back until Monday to start doing the next coat. So again, creating a lot of issues with cracking and failures of the stucco, and how we prevent that from happening. I don't have an idea, because obviously we can't sit out on a job site in a lawn chair, make somebody hose it down and keep it in a moist state is what is required in the code, but it's also required in the ASTM. It's obviously something that's a big issue if it's listed in multiple governing bodies. ASTM C926, standard application for Portland cement-based plaster. This is why these ASTMs are so important. Some of these here you're going to see, this never ever happens, but it should be happening. A2.1.2, the construction specifier shall describe in the appropriate section of the contract specifications the requirements for furnishing an application of flashings. Flashing shall be specified at openings, perimeters, and terminations to prevent water from getting behind the plaster. That's critical, behind. Peel and stick does not prevent water from getting behind the plaster. It only addresses it once it's behind behind any product, but the plaster in this case. Flashing shall be corrosion resistant material. Aluminum flashing shall not be used. Very specific. But one of the things in here you're going to see in a couple of chapters in the ASTM, it requires construction, a construction specifier shall describe. Okay. So it all has to be written down, and then it has to have a contract with the specifications. Okay. That's not being done. Every builder is required to have a stucco contract that he's from that specifier that he should be providing to his subcontractor, saying, here is the details, here's what's required, you need to install the stucco per this. Again, X1.1.6, the contract documents consist of many individual items, but includes both the specifications and the contract drawings. Okay, and it lists that in more than one area, also in the ASTM. So there's to be drawings of how these stucco trim accessories, flashings, all the other stuff is to be installed. Is the intent of the standard to have the type, location, depth, and orientation of control and expansion joints, both stated in the specifications as well as shown and detailed in the contract drawings. Again, saying drawings, where either or both of these documents exist for any particular project. They're pretty serious, and there's other aspects in there in this ASTM covering it, and there's some areas that refer to it as shop drawings. So they meant it. If they put it in there more than once, they meant it, and it is not happening anywhere. And if you do see a little bit in the architectural aspects, they're omitting it, which theoretically, I guess under their license they can, but now we're creating a stucco product that does not comply with the code and does not comply with the ASTM. And we use the word stucco. I want to clarify something. Stucco is a conglomeration of products being used to create a plaster finish. The plaster is a cementitious product that goes on as part of that stucco. Okay, so plaster can be used inside of a house, can be used outside of a house. The stucco, though, consists of, as you can see, of a WRB. It consists of a rain screen or furring. It consists of a second layer of WRB. It consists of your lath. It consists of your expansion joints. And we use the word expansion joints, but control joints are also permissible, and that's mostly what we use in Texas, is a single control joint. It does not expand and contract as much. It's still an expansion joint. It does say in there that a control joint is to help with expansion and contraction. So it is theoretically still an expansion type of joint. So just remember that the stucco is a whole bunch of things put together to create something, and plaster is just the aspects that go on as part of the finish process of the stucco. Again, ASTM C926, standard specification for installing lath and furring to receive interior and exterior Portland cement-based plaster. Separation shall be provided where plaster butts dissimilar construction materials or openings. Again, the general term we use is just a bond break. And there's areas that are going into a little more detail. It needs to have a certain amount of space, and if we exceed the sealant's capability, then we have to add a backer rod and so forth to receive the sealants at the dissimilar materials. One of the things, and I want to hit on, we go back one little section here, the flashing aspect. Remember, this is not just windows or doors. When you read this, it's at openings, perimeters, and terminations to prevent water from getting behind the plaster. A termination can be at the bottom of the wall. It can be at the gable end vent that's above a window. The roof line, that's a huge failure where they don't have a drainage plane, and flashing details with that. And remember, those flashing details were specified at the termination to be have a 3.5-inch flange, which actually works as part of the flashing and so forth. So the weep screed and so forth is what needs to terminate. There's other ways to do it as well, but the weep screed is just probably one of the simplest ways. We're going to kind of get into some of this. I like these products here. I've done a lot of different things with weatherization partners through the years and so forth, and different people there. I really like these Keen products. There's other products that have been out there for a long time. You'll see some others have been around even longer than this. Here is one of their rain screen products. If you are a building official and you're interested, if you will contact Keen, they will send you some of these products. I have a whole box of stuff that rides in the back of my truck that I use whenever I meet up with building officials or home builders and so forth. Um, this drawing had to be shrunk down a little bit so you can't see the detail of the wording as much, but it's a whole process of a vent skin system. Their product, if you remember, it required to be 5 millimeters. This product is actually 6 millimeters, so definitely covers it. It gives you ways to terminate your flashing details at expansion joints or control joints, an intake up here. So we're really basically pulling air up the wall and out through this venting system that terminates up here. It can be sealed and caulked up here, and there is a way to do it, but they have an actual vent skin system that just literally draws the air up. Again, it's drying out these stucco walls, but by pulling in that fresh, cooler air down here, we are also going to make a big difference on our energy efficiency with these products. And hopefully one day we can get the code to require it behind every type of product, whether it's fiber cement, whether it's cedar, but anything that does not have that. Obviously, our masonry veneer already has that 1-inch air pocket back there that, when done right, allows air to move through there and works great for breaking that thermal bridging. ASTM 2112, huge failure that's not occurring. It gets into details of your flashings, your end dams. This is all required to be in there. James Hardy requires head flashing above their trim. They put it on here. There's no end dams. Your pan or sill flashings, again, when they just use a plastic product or even a peel and stick product, those are not creating your back dam here. Okay, they do fold it up here and create a side dam or end dams, but they're not creating the back dam as specified in the ASTM standards. So we have the issue on these windows where the water's running off down the wall. I've seen a few builders that attempt to do this, but then they turn around and fold the tab downwards, which is not doing anything, obviously, but it should have these end dams on there. I've noticed that most of the window manufacturers all sell their flashings. You can order them when you order the windows, and every one of those flashings per the ASTM, 100% of them are cut too short, and they're only protecting the window frame itself, and the flashings do not extend out past the nailing fins. So that 1 inch, 1.5 inch wide nailing fin is open on each side to allow water to get behind it. So their flashings are really a major conducive area for water penetration and issues. And you're going to see with a lot of the forensic stuff I do, how big of an issue it comes on these houses. It just completely is destroying houses and buildings. I've done numerous commercial buildings 8-9 years down the road with extensive damage. I had a commercial building one time that was about 6,500 square feet in San Antonio. It's about 8 years old. I told my client that it had $650,000 in damage, and it came in at $850,000. I knew it was going to be high. That's why I listed as that amount, but part of it had a doctor's office, and I could not get in around all the equipment to see how bad some of the walls were in there, and it turned out they were all gone. So basically the building was stripped all the way back down to the steel columns and joists and everything. It was basically back to a shell. Even the parapet walls, everything on this had to be torn off down to the shell, and that's why it came in at so high of an issue. So this is catastrophic. The other thing that's going to make this really bad is the builders right now in the political world are fighting to change the statute of repose. They've done this before. Other states have done it. The statute of repose is that 10-year warranty that is here in the state of Texas for these homes for structural damage. They were pushing for 8. They're now down to 6, and you'll see in my photos here in a little while why that 6 years is so important to them. These houses are completely just rotting away and costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. I always liked this product. This is one of the early products, so I plagiarized them, give them credit. They were one of the early companies out there doing a rain screen. They use a Brillo type of pad in here to help control water. This is an older detail. This does not comply with the new standards, which are now 2 layers of WRB. Some people refer to it as a sacrificial piece, a bond break, but different things. So this particular product doesn't have it, but it does. I liked it because it does break it down. It does show the sheathing, does show the WRB and so forth, and shows the rain screen and so forth that's in there. So it's a nice detail. Shows you the termination. This is probably not the best termination here. Um, I like to see this with a 3.5-inch flange for this horizontal expansion joint. But as you can see, what they've done in their details is the rain screen goes on, this goes on top of that. So any moisture that gets behind this layer here, it's still going to be controlled by the rain screen and then the next layer here. This is a little bit better of a drawing detailing the different layers. I think I like that one pretty well. Another detailed drawing showing you how to use a 2-piece plaster stop to create an expansion joint. This can be done vertically or horizontally. You can see they're adding a backer rod in there in their sealant. Works very well and is permissible just to use 2 casing beads, plaster stops, J channels, whatever you want to call it in your area. It does allow that. One of the things to watch though, when they use these casing beads or plaster stops, a lot of them are perforated. Those perforations in the weep screed and in these plaster stops are not for water. It's to let the air out so that there's not air pockets and you can get the plaster all the way down in there. With the weep screed, it's actually part of the manufacturing process. It's got the holes in there. Those are not weep holes. The machine grabs it, pulls it, and that's what makes that bend in there. Okay, so it's part of the manufacturing process. But when they use these, if they're perforated, it can let moisture escape and get behind that sealant, and it's not doing everything it needs to do. And so typically when you have those terminations like that, you do not want the perforated casing beads in there. Getting into the window jamb, how we're creating the plaster stopper casing bead. There's your backer rod. Here's your sealant. This is what is required. You cannot just butter this up like they do on every single project in the state of Texas and other states. You're not allowed to do that. You cannot do that. And when you start getting into aluminum windows, it creates a problem. With some of these vinyl windows, if it expands a bunch, it'll warp and distort the windows in some cases. Just not a good way to do it. It's not allowed. So it is required to have your plaster stopper, your casing bead to create an embedded caulk joint and so forth. And that's what we have here that's creating that separation. And it would continue our expansion joints up because our expansion joints would switch over and go from here. And that would continue up the wall section with that. Let's see here. This is getting into your weep screed with a flashing detail that kicks it down. This is above a window, so it's your head flashings, but it does have to have that 3.5-inch flashing detail. And you notice how it does turn down here. If you use this type of flashing detail, then it has to be sloped here to get the water off, just like a weep screed. Okay. It does not show the end dams on here because it is a cross section. You notice they cut out the window and stuff. But in this case, they're doing the flashing and then they're doing a plaster stop on top of that, which is a great way to do it. You do have to watch it. If that plaster stop curves up on the end, it creates an issue for ice damming, especially as you guys go northward. But it does occasionally happen here. If it ice dams, it just completely fractures. It forces that moisture up the wall, obviously damages it, the plaster everywhere. So it cannot have that turned up lip if you're going to do something like that. So one of the simplest ways is to go ahead and put your head flashings on and then just do a weep screed here, and that'll solve a lot of that problem. More windows, giving you some more details. This presentation these slides will be available. So y'all can get a copy of this. Again, this is all the same company. Like I said, they spent so much time and energy putting these details together many years ago, but it's getting you into some of your flashing details. In this case, they're creating a bib underneath the window, which is a great way to do it. Here is one of the biggest failures that you see, and that's these decorative bands. This detail here is a drawing directly out of ASTM-C 926, okay? It's not the same, but it's done just like what is required in that ASTM. Most of these guys are putting on a plaster stopper casing bead. They're filling it with lath and concrete. They're poking holes, additional holes all in the flashings. It's just a complete and utter mess the way we do it. If you notice this, it shows you you're gonna put your plaster coat over the top of it. You're gonna extend a layer of WRB over the top of this. It is sloped, and it does detail the slope in the ASTM-C 926 to shed water. This is a proper detail for your decorative bands, okay? This is the only way that's permissible according to that ASTM-C 926. They don't list any other way to make decorative bands. This is it. This is never happening. When they put the foam on there, they're nailing it, putting holes through there. It's not covered by the WRB. They just put a polymer top coat over the top of it to make it flow with it, and the water's going back behind here and being trapped in there, following the fasteners in and so forth. These products are not going to be nailed on. They're going to be adhered with an adhesive to hold them on and so forth. This is a huge failure aspect of most all houses that have decorative bands. Termination at soffits and gables. If you notice, again, we have another casing bead or plaster stop here, okay? This is creating a bond break for this. The plaster should not go all the way up to any other detail, whether it's soffits or anything else. It is required to have that space in there and have a separation between the materials, okay? And again, that's hardly ever happening whatsoever, especially with hardy siding. They're just bumping it right up to that fiber cement siding, and they're just stopping at that, and it does not have the plaster stop or the casing bead. Here's your weep screed detail. It should go on before your WRB. They're not doing it. If you put it on after the WRB, it has to have very good tape installed over the top of it, such as with a product with zip board and so forth. Any air pockets, any crinkles in there can allow that moisture up underneath there. It's showing you here that your minimum overhang is 1 inch, okay? This is really not a very good detail because a weep screed is measured from the top of the flange to this inside corner here, okay? So that is a 3.5 inch flashing or 3.5 inch weep screed. The total length of that weep screed to that bottom turn down flange down here is going to be roughly about 4.5 inches. So per code, our siding has to overhang by 1 inch. So when it does that and you use the pre-punch nailing holes to secure it in the toe plate like you should, you're going to get roughly a 2 inch overhang. I mean, don't go around measuring and go, oh my God, this one's only 1 3/4. Depending on where the holes are at, you're going to get that plus, you know, on going up or down, nailing into your toe plate, you know, or your sole plate, whatever you want to refer to it as. You're going to get some deviations. But if you're getting anything over 1.5 inches, they probably did what they were supposed to do here, okay? And I stick my fingers up underneath there, anything to kind of get a measurement. If I can't get my finger in there, I'll stick a piece of wire, stick anything and hit bottom in there and make sure they're doing that. And they are hardly ever doing that, so that when you get a hard wind-driven rain, we're forcing the water up underneath here, and we're getting a huge failure amount up underneath this, okay? So we do have to get the right overhang. This 1 inch measurement is really not showing up right. It would actually be 1 inch from right here would drop down like that, and it would give you almost 2 inches. And when you look at the manufacturer's specifications on these weep screeds, you'll see where they actually do that, okay? This one here going to give you a little bit better of a detail. Again, it's fallen short a little bit. but I just use this a lot because it breaks it down to a good drawing. Again, it would actually be overhanging a little bit more. It gives you your 2-inch clearance to the ground. If you don't get those 2-inch clearances, you're going to pull water up into this plaster. It's going to wick the moisture up in there. It's a huge issue that occurs, especially when we have stucco columns. Stucco columns, masonry columns are all failing everywhere because they are actually not lifted up. They're just bringing this pressure treated wood down, and they're bringing the stucco right down to the bottom of it. The moisture is getting into this toe plate and it's soaking up into the studs. These studs are not pressure treated. If you notice, the code will tell you that if they're not pressure treated, they have to clear by at least 2 inches. This toe plate here is not, so it creates an issue on all those columns at your porches and stuff. They're just rotting away big time, creating a huge amount of issues. Giving you a detail for termination at a deck. Again, this is never happening. They are not putting in their joists properly for the deck. They're not flashing it right, bringing the stucco. Again, the stucco would stay 2 inches off the deck. We would have the flashing detail. We have another flashing detail that would occur here. I don't know that I agree totally with this flashing detail. I personally would make the flashing also come up and out and down here to help control that aspect of any moisture that soaks in here and gets in there. We could control that a little bit better, but it does give you an idea of how the deck is supposed to be done with the flashing on top over the ledger and a stop in the stucco. I just did one yesterday for a court case that I just got the documents out last night. Stucco come down, nailed it right through it. Porch roof nailed right through it, all through the stucco. Just a huge, massive problems on a brand new house. The house is pretty well totaled. It's about 2 years old, and architect designed it. The builder didn't follow the plans, and I think our repairs are going to be about $350,000, which will total the house. The guy already owned the lot, and a lot of the stuff was there, so that to replace that house is about $300,000, based on because of the foundation can stay and stuff like that. So probably a house that's 2 years old that's completely totaled. Your penetrations. Now, this is not a good penetration. I probably should remove this out of here. They're just trying to caulk and seal this penetration to the WRB. That's not a proper flashing detail. Now, if we used a liquid flash here, okay, but using a sealant to our WRB, horrible idea, never going to hold up and work right. I like those quick flash boots, but you can use flashing tape or whatever, but this does need a better flashing deal. And I'm probably going to remove this slide, but we do need to have a flashing at any of these things, any penetration. Right now, because of things that have been happening since COVID, all of the stucco houses, masonry veneer, and fiber cement siding houses, they're all going to fail. We're going to end up with huge failure amounts because they are putting on the stucco, putting on the fiber cement. They're punching their holes through their WRB and they're caulking it here. Then they're going on the backside and only using polyseal. The moisture gets in because they can't seal it to the WRB. They can't flash it to the WRB like that. It's getting to your OSBs and everything, and it just starts pushing all of this out because it's warping and getting rotted and deteriorated. There's just tons of houses. You have to make all your penetrations through your WRB and flash them before you can go and put on any material. Doesn't matter what it is. Or we could be talking about cedar siding. Doesn't matter. We've got to flash our WRB. And this is a huge breakdown in the last few years. And the amount of damage that's going to be occurring to houses can be catastrophic. This is a roof detail that I plagiarized that I love. Because it gives you your base flashing here for your roof, okay? And they're just ending this with a foundation weep screed, okay? Great way to do it, coming up off the roof 2 inches. It's being secured up here. We're not punching any additional holes in our flashing like you would with a plaster stop or a casing bead. And so it's just creating everything we need this to do. The water comes down, drips off the drip edge portion of this. This is where the water comes off, is down on the very bottom aspect. That's a 45-degree angle that creates a drip edge. It goes into detail that this drip edge portion here is not allowed to be sealed, and it's being sealed by elastomeric polymer paints, even latex paints, that all has to have a razor knife, and it all has to be cut and scraped off there so the water can get out of there and drip it. All your flashing details, your kick out flashings or turnout flashings at the roof line, all of those are being completely sealed shut with these products, and the water's not getting out of here. Okay, so it is important to keep those cleaned out. Another roof detail, and this one works here too as well, and I like this one. So we have our base flashing using our counter flashing. Our counter flashing can work as long as we go up 3.5 inches, okay, from this inside corner up, because it does spell out 3.5 inches. It's got to go up. It does have to go on behind our WRB here, okay, for this. But the only thing about this is this does have to be at a slight angle here so the water can drip out of this edge here. Okay, so it does need to have a slight angle on there in order to work. Okay, and if it's not done like that, it can trap moisture in there. Again, the further north you go, then we start having ice damming issues and all kinds of damage from ice damming. This is another one. This is right out of code check. So I love this. This is exactly how it's detailed in the ASTM to do this. This should not have a turned up edge here, again, because we'll create ice damming issues. But we are required to have a slight gap here. We overhang a 1/4 of an inch. Yeah, there it is, a 1/4 of an inch below. This keeps this drainage plane open. So whenever you see a soffit, or say this may be our porch beams, our double LVLs for porches or whatever, they're doing this as all one piece and wrapping the stucco completely around that. Huge failures. I've got several houses that are just only a few years old. The porch beams are completely rotted out and failing because of all the holes in here and not having a drainage plane. We have to have that drainage plane. If we trap water, we're going to have a problem. When you see stucco at like box windows or any type of extensions, they'll do stucco here and then sometimes put James Hardy on there up underneath the box window, or at a front porch. I love that detail, but then next thing you know, the painter or the homeowner comes along and caulks this shut. And I go, no, you can't do that. You got to cut that caulk out of there, get it out of there. This is our drainage plane. This is going to get the water out of here. I prefer they use a weep screed, not a foundation weep screed. It'll be at a 45-degree angle here. And then we don't caulk it, and that's our drainage plane here. But they do make a plaster stop here with a 3.5-inch flashing detail. It's actually made for eaves and stuff, and it works pretty well for this point. We just don't want that turn up, and it may have a turn up there of a 1/16 of an inch or something like that. That's fine. And they typically have big 1/2-inch holes in there for the eaves one, so it will work as our drainage plane, and it keeps us as a 2-part system here. Okay. This drawing here, where was this out of? I think this was out. I forget who. Oh, Fortifiber. Okay, this is Fortifibers. Giving you your window flashing details. I like this real well, but it does defy the code. The code says that this flashing is to terminate between the 2 layers of WRB, which I think is a huge mistake personally. I don't like to do that. If it's insistent on doing it, I make them run a bib, so it'll have a 3rd layer underneath here to prevent leakage. I do like this. They said, well, it gets plugged up with stucco and doesn't drain. I call BS just for the fact that these products stay open to the atmosphere so much that these plastic Fortiflash sill flashings here get all wrinkled up and shrink and everything like that. And so they're very much wrinkled and crinkled up to create drainage channels in these products. I do like this detail, but keep in mind it does not necessarily coincide with the code, because the code does say that these sill flashings must terminate between the layers of WRB.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
My apologies. This is a lot of good information. We are only scheduled for about an hour and 15. So maybe perhaps we can make a part 2.
We can.
Soon.
That's going to be up to you. Let me see what I got left. Because yeah, we've got. Then we get into all the defect photos.
Yes.
You let me know. I can probably rush through this because we can start skipping some of these slides. pretty quickly and start looking at, but you tell me, I mean, did you want to
Well,
go to 10:30?
I think that it's a lot of good information. I think it's probably best to do a part two. We've got a few questions in the
Okay.
chat as well, if you want to address those real
Yep,
quick, and then we can wrap that up.
I can. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Let me get out of here. Let's see. Now let me get the window back open. Not getting the window open here.
Sorry about that.
Well, now it's me on this one. I use it a little bit differently. I'm gonna go ahead and close this presentation out then, and that might help.
Yeah, and then just stop sharing. I'll be able to share mine. But yeah, another person has put in the question in the Q&A section that a part two would be great, because that way we can go a little slower with some questions.
Okay. Yeah, it is, like I said, I do this class anything from 2 to 4 hours. I am not seeing okay, here it is. Let me get it here. Part two would be great. That's the only thing I've got in here on my end showing a question.
Yeah, there's questions in the chat.
Oh, there we go. Let me open the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me back
So
up
just real
here.
quick, so first question here is there a special instructor certification for stucco inspectors? And how would you know if someone is qualified to make stucco inspections?
Yeah, so there is the Exterior Design Institute, EDI. They had some issues before, but they do get into a lot of this. A couple things I don't like about EDI. I do not believe in drilling holes in stucco. If we're going to make holes, we're going to cut big holes. We're not just going to drill holes and then caulk it. So that is an issue I have. But yes, EDI has some great classes. They have an online class for your level one. And so there is some certifications. There are certain areas that do require that EDI certification. So that would be an option to go to. I also see, will the slides be available? I don't, we made them available before, and I'm presuming Spear will do that again. And if not, people can contact me. I will update the PDF. I was attempting to do that this morning. I have not done it yet, but I'll have I can update a PDF for that and get that out. Anybody wants it, or I can get it over to Spear for you guys.
Yeah, if you want to just update that PDF and send it to me, and then I'll put it out with the survey.
Okay. Is there a checklist? I don't really have a checklist. I mean, one could be put together. There's just so many things to look at, and I guess it would be doable. It's just I've been doing it so long, I have it in my head, and so I just don't have a checklist. But obviously, one could be developed, and maybe I'll work on that for you city guys. So much of that is going to be with our WRB, because again, stucco is just a decorative detail that's water resistant, no different than brick or stone or anything else. Texas A&M has a study where they put up a brick wall between two people, spray it with a garden hose, within 30 seconds, water's on the other side of the wall. So again, these materials are very porous, going to allow it through there. What we really have to be so concerned about, even more than the moist cure and everything else that they're not doing, and leaving out the expansion joints, all of that's great, but it's all about the WRB and the flashing details. That, no matter what our product is, that's what we really have to get more in tune on. And maybe we'll do something just on WRBs in the future, which I've done. And there is and you're going to have a copy of that class coming up that we did, if you remember. So you should have access to that coming up, as well as being able to put it on the Spear website.
Okay, that'd be great.
The recording part, that's for you. Okay.
Yes, is there examples of minimal submittal documents for stucco contractors should submit to the city prior to issuing stucco permits?
There's not. It would be great if somebody would come up with that. I'm actually writing some right now for somebody, and I don't know that they intended for me to be the guy to write it and do the drawings. It doesn't say. I think probably the ASTM was probably thinking more in line, it should be the engineer or the architect. But believe it or not, these engineers and architects don't know anything about stucco. They call me, and I mean, they know just a little bit, and they'll ask for my help on it. So there's a real breakdown on that. The other thing is, to have a cookie cutter contract would be very, very difficult based on what you're doing, because as you saw early on, we can do a 2-coat or we can do a 3-coat depending on what our substrate is behind the plaster. And then when we start getting into coastal areas, and that's what I'm doing it for now, is one for South Padre, for a builder on a 3-story condo deal, is then we've got to have products that are plastic or vinyl or stainless. We can use hot dip galvanized. I'm not as big a fan of that. I rather use a stainless down there. In this case, we're going to use a plastic or PVC product. Same thing with our lath, staying away from metal laths and stuff. So there's just not a good way to do it. I mean, it really should be, it should be something as a building official, you want to ask them for a copy of their details and start with that. But, yes, you should be getting some type of detail on it and not just turning somebody loose with their own homemade mix. And that's the other problem we have, is all these guys very seldom will buy a true pre-manufactured plaster. They all have their own family recipe: a scoop of this much sand, a scoop of this much cement, and then they just sit there and shoot water all in it. And the problem with that is it's not a weighed out balanced material. Plus they dump all the sand in there and they start getting dirt mixed with it and stuff. And so that's what really happens. When I do it, I do specify that they have to buy a pre-manufactured product such as Quickcrete. I mean, there's a bunch on the market, but that I don't just turn them loose to do that, because there's no control over that. So that long answer, but no, there's nothing there. It'd be good if someone would have it, but as a building official, you definitely want to ask for any details or drawings, specifications for the stucco, to include the flashings and WRB.
Yeah, I think that would, that'd be great to have. And I think with me sitting and listening to how 2024 is written for IECC and for things like that, I can just see even the IRC committees. There will be a stucco manufacturer probably down the line that will probably have some say in that and try to get some of those things written into the code. I know they're having for residential now in 2021, you're having to show where your air barrier is located and the details for that. I can see this coming to code in the near future, possibly. Here's
Well, let
another
me back
question.
up a
Great
little bit
question
real
here
quick.
is service electrical equipment connections for stucco. What's your thoughts?
Well, let me back up real quick on that.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
if you're looking for something, Quickcrete has a very good detail. The problem with it is it's a broad spectrum to cover the whole state. So there's a bunch of stuff you don't need in there, but it also falls short. But if you will Google Quickcrete stucco specifications, they have a really good starter. It does not have your shop drawings or anything like that is required. But Quickcrete has a really good one that I looked through and plagiarized a little bit. And in return, I specify their plaster. So if you Google that, it is out there, and it's I think it's actually I've got it printed here on my desk. I think it's 25 pages, but it's called Quickcrete Guide Specifications, and
Great.
it's on stucco, and so it is a start, and it has areas in there for specifiers notes. So you could take this and the builder could whittle this down and then get specific specifications for where it's at. Okay, so what was the next question, Senor, about the electrical?
Your thoughts on, yes, service electrical equipment connecting directly to stucco.
Yeah, that's always a big issue, because when you look at NEC 250.4, it says anything basically metallic that can become energized can be an issue. So like when I go out and I'm doing some things, and there's a few small cities south of San Antonio that use me occasionally for their certificate of occupancies and stuff. I want to see metal roofs and all of that grounded and bonded, but I've had this discussion. None of the metal lath in a house, the metal flashings that are attached to the, that the lath is touching and everything like that, none of that is ever grounded or bonded. And so there is an issue, and it has occurred where the stucco has become energized because of that. Although I would think it was pretty rare, but it does create an issue. And it does create an issue, obviously, for lightning and other things, where we have a gigantic metal mesh over a house that can become energized. And I think that's probably where he was going with that.
Well, that and like I've seen your electrical service disconnect panels outside just being directly connected to stucco. And so
Yes,
they're just
yeah,
taking screws and driving it all the way through. I mean,
yes,
other than
yes,
go ahead.
okay, and that, yeah, that I don't know how else we do that. That's also happening with wrought iron railings into the columns. And I had a house out at Canyon Lake, 1.5 million, and the rear wall of the house was 150,000 to fix, and that was one of the sources for water. I don't know how you do the electrical panels. I do not, if I'm involved, do not allow wrought iron railings to be secured through the stucco. They have to have a footing, connect to the porches or what have you. Vertically, I don't want that. There is some expansive siliconized sealants that probably drill a hole, fill that up completely with it, and then run your fastener in there. I don't know what else you can do with that. That would take some major planning to get those installed on there first, flash around them, and then apply stucco around them, and then seal it. I'm saying it could be done, but that's a battle for the future. When they first started coming out with these rain screens, I told keen that I was against it. And they said, "What do you mean? How could you be against the rain screens?" I said, "Well, if we can't get the first part, the second part, and the third part installed properly, what makes you think we can add a fourth part such as a rain screen?" And they said, "Good point. We just had someone up in Austin put the rain screen on backwards, and they put the WRB on the inside of the wall, and they put the rain screen on the outside of the wall that just got completely filled with plaster. It all had to come down and redo it." So um, yeah, I would hate I think that something should be done with that, but it would be so difficult at this point to do. The other big failure, as you're talking about that, are these water heater housings for your tankless water
Tankless.
heaters. Yeah, there's all kinds of issues with those because you can't even put a drain pan in those, and those are inset in the wall. Well, those have to be head flashed, and they're not putting any flashing down the side with peel and stick. They're not doing any of that, and those are huge leak issues. But it does have to have a weep screed or some type of head flashing because again, that's a stucco termination above that water heater. If I'm involved, I make them put the flashing in there. Um, but a lot of times I'm seeing them after the fact. So it's just another issue and another failure point that we have to look at and address. And again, when you look at those things, I don't know that it really matters that much because if we're talking about fiber cement siding, we're drilling holes through that as well to attach your panels and your disconnects to. And again, we're making holes through those WRBs and everything. It's just a real issue to try to control that, and I don't have a good answer.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up here. Like I said, Jeff and I will get together. We'll put together a part two, and I will just email directly everyone that's been on the call today. I'll email you directly with the invite. It won't be on the newsletter. It'll just be a second part. We can get that going. But that was a lot of great information. Jeff, I appreciate your time with that. You and I will talk offline, and we'll get together and set up something soon for a part two.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And like I said, we'll get the PDF shared to everybody. It will be uploaded to our YouTube as part one. And after that, and then we've got, I put up a second ago, we have the two webinars coming up June 1st, advanced framing. You guys have requested that instead of just telling you on some of the videos is going through the advanced framing techniques and then also understanding Table R 402.4.1.1, a deep dive into the building thermal envelope requirements of the 2021 IECC. So again, thanks everyone for your time today, and we will see y'all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.